Well, a very warm good evening to all of you. Thank you for coming along tonight. My name's Ro Allen. I'm the Victorian Commissioner for LGBTQI+ communities. It's my great honour to acknowledge country tonight. We are on stolen land of the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and I want to pay my respects to elders past and present, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander folks that are with us tonight. I am very proud to represent a government that's working on treaty, and tonight I want to restate my commitment to treaty and reconciliation in Victoria. So why have you come out in the cold? Can you believe it's this cold tonight? And welcome to those that are streaming online. Hopefully you're warm. It's to talk about a very important issue, LGBTIQ+ family violence. So what do we know about family violence? In our communities, we know that it's not just intimate partner violence. And the violence between LGBTIQ and heterosexual, for some letters of the alphabet, is even higher than our heterosexual and cisgender friends. But we don't talk about it enough, and we're going to talk about it well and truly tonight. So the campaign, it also coincides with the campaign launch, of course, and I'm sure that everybody here has had a look at it. And if you haven't wept a little tear out of the side of your eye, I challenge you to watch it again. It is extraordinary and it is fantastic, and it's many of these people here tonight that we have to thank for those authentic stories. You know, and not all LGBTIQ+ people have horrific stories. Some have fabulous families and supports like I have. But I can just, a quick story, when the Respect Victoria team asked me to help them find the talent, it was just before Christmas. And so if you can imagine, here's the Commissioner trying to ring people from our community just before Christmas to ask them if they have supportive families and whether they can participate. And it really struck home for me how many of our community don't have those supportive families, and that's where it's at. And as I said, it's not just the intimate partner family violence, it's family violence from family and extended family. So nothing happens in my office without all the other wonderful parts of government. We have had an absolute joy and pleasure working with Respect Victoria. What an incredible team, headed up by an incredible person. Can I thank Tracey for all of the work that you put into this? They have really gone the hard yards, and I know you'll agree with me that the campaign is really hitting a high note. And getting a lot of traction and getting a lot of conversation. So Tracey, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for all the work. I'm thanking you, but there's a whole team behind you, as I know, and I just want to pass over to you and say thank you again.
Thank you, Ro, and thanks to all of your team as well. And there are actually quite a few acknowledgements that I'd like to make on behalf of Respect Victoria before we move into the panel session, which is really going to be the conversations we need to be having more and more out in society and everyday society. I would also like to pay our respects to the traditional owners of the land and know that this land was never ceded. I'd like to pay respects, importantly, in line of the work that Respect Victoria does, preventing all forms of family violence and violence against women. Pay respects to victims and survivors of family violence, and for our work that continues until family violence in any form impacting any member of the community is fully eradicated. This Pride, Respect, Equality campaign has been nearly 4 years in the making. The 4 years has helped Respect Victoria firstly come to fruition, but importantly learn about the extreme volumes of family violence. You talked about family violence impacting LGBTIQ+ people more on average. Some statistics and some of the studies show that 60% of LGBTIQ+ people have experienced family violence. If that doesn't tell us why we need to be bringing this campaign to life, I don't know what does. I'd like to share a story about one of our panellists tonight, Sage, who you'll hear more from in just a little while. If you've seen the campaign already, there is the TVC version of the campaign, which is the real actors, you know, the actors who put on their presence, who'll play a part. The bulk of the campaign is around what we've called authentic stories. Everyday people bravely and proudly sharing their stories about being a member of the LGBTIQ+ community and gaining the support of their family members. And it's their family members who are importantly sharing their journey of what it means to treat their own members of family with equality, safety and respect. And Sage was actually planning to be one of our authentic stories, and because of coronavirus and the filming, we had a few hiccups. But we managed to spend some time with Sage, who's here tonight. And one of the things that you said was how long it's taken to fight for a voice and for equality and for respect. Now that says why we're doing this campaign. Because each and every person, no matter what their personal characteristics, their beliefs or their position in society, should be respected by each and every one, but importantly and critically their family members. This campaign is not the work of Respect Victoria alone, as Ro has indicated. We've worked very closely with the Commissioner's Office, but importantly with members of the community, everyday people in the community, constructed working groups, both Ministers Williams and Minister Foley and their teams, organisations like Drummond Street, Karen here tonight. Where are you, Karen? To Rainbow Door, Joe's on the panel tonight, and LGBTI+ community groups all throughout the state. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Sally to introduce the panellists tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ro and Tracey, and I just want to echo both of your acknowledgements of country and just affirm that the land we meet on tonight always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming along tonight. I feel like every single time that there is an event like this, or even just a gathering with more than like 2 people, it feels like there was just such a long period of time last year when we never thought, well, I never thought that we'd ever be able to do this ever again. And so even though we're going to talk about some pretty serious stuff tonight, I can't help but feel like a little bit happy that we're all in the room together. So it's a real collision of feelings for me, and I'm sure that will just continue, really. Thank you so much to the Wheeler Centre and to Respect Victoria for pulling together this campaign and also this event tonight. Before I introduce the panel, I just want to mention, as I'm sure everyone here is aware, we are going to be covering some pretty heavy topics tonight. We don't have a sort of exhaustive list of that, but I can imagine we could touch on things like suicide, sexual assault, domestic abuse, drug use, sort of a whole bunch of stuff that is quite difficult to hear about sometimes. And I just wanted to say that while we're all expecting that to likely come up, please feel that like if any moment you need a break, like feel free to take a break, head to the back of the room, like anything you need to do. And in like same vibe but slightly different, like if you need to use the bathroom, jump up and like walk out. If you need to stretch your legs, I have ADD and I find it really difficult to stay seated for a long period of time. So what I'm trying to say is like just get up anytime you need, and if somebody does get up, know that they might not necessarily be upset, they might just need to use the bathroom. So don't worry about it. We're all here tonight because everyone on stage here, and I think everybody in the audience, believes that nobody should experience violence or discrimination because of their sexuality or gender identity. And so the hope is that we will all leave here tonight with a renewed commitment and a renewed inspiration to listen and speak up for other LGBTIQ people, particularly if they're members of our family, logical or biological, and feel empowered knowing that our support will actually make a difference. So, to introductions. Down here interpreting for us tonight, we have Amber and Linda, who are interpreting for Auslan, so thank you very much for being here. I'm going to read some bios. I'm sure many of you know the panellists, but we're going to do it anyway. Next to me here is Jo Ball. Jo is a long-standing LGBTIQA plus activist and the CEO of Switchboard Victoria. Who's heard of Switchboard? Everybody, yes. Switchboard runs Australia's only LGBTIQA dedicated family violence prevention helpline, the Rainbow Door. Jo believes in grassroots solutions to systemic issues and draws upon LGBTIQA history and the wisdom of LGBTIQA plus elders to guide their work. In 2020, Jo was honoured as one of the 50 outstanding LGBTI plus leaders in Australia. Wow. Jo proudly identifies as trans non-binary and uses the pronouns they, them. Jo works and lives on the lands of the Kulin Nation in Naarm, Melbourne, Victoria. Welcome, Jo.
To sit through your own bio, isn't it?
It's no good.
It's a real thing. You want to sort of interject and...
I recently sat through someone who'd found something old and started reading like award nominations from like 2015 or something. And I was like, you don't have to do that.
Yeah,
I didn't even win.
I've had someone tell the audience what high school I went to and that I was a surf lifesaver. And I was like, oh, that was when I was 16. Anyway, now you know those things.
Sage Akouri is a queer, non-binary Lebanese person and a long-standing advocate for the LGBTIQA plus community. Sage's experience extends across the sector, having led several initiatives, programs and campaigns at -18 and Equality Australia, and most recently has co-founded a not-for-profit organisation called Speak, focusing on creating LGBTIQA plus inclusive spaces in regional Victoria, and their pronouns are they, them. Welcome, Sage.
Thank you.
And in the red, we have Karen Field, in the red corner. Karen has 30 years. It's a tasteless joke, that one. Karen has 30 years' experience in developing, managing and delivering a range of public health evidence-based programs and services to communities, families, parents, young people and children. Her work has involved a range of sectors including health, primary and mental health, and welfare, family violence, education and employment, and justice sectors within government and community-based organisations. She's a campaigner for social justice and the human rights and dignity for all Australians and the recognition of all families. This is especially demonstrated in her commitment to step families. I'm a stepmom. We can talk about that later.
We can talk.
Well, we can talk about it now, but it's not.
It's not then.
She's 6 and she started prep this year.
So we're going to
step families, refugee and humanitarian entrants and their families, and the LGBTIQ plus communities and their families. Karen's pronouns are she, her. Please make Karen welcome. Just going to have a drink. All right, thank you so much, everybody on the panel here, for being on the panel. The first thing I want to talk about is this idea of violence and danger and abuse, because I think when we, the collective we in society think about violence or danger or abuse, we kind of conjure up this image of like a stranger in a balaclava in an alleyway. But that's not actually what the statistics reflect, right? People, no matter who they are most likely to be, face violence or abuse from someone in their family. And I wondered, why do we think that those two, like this image and the reality, are so incongruous? Why aren't families right up there in the public understanding of where these sorts of terrible things take place? Jo, do you want to?
I mean, that's a really, really big question.
It's a philosophical one.
Yeah, and it's how family is positioned under capitalism as a short answer. I mean, look, it's true. And I think it's the role that the idealisation of families, but also the role they have intergenerationally, and what people call them the bedrock of society, and what it means if they are dysfunctioning. And I think that, I think that people like to think about violence as haphazard, but what we actually know about family violence is that it's a habit of behaviour over time. It's not a single incident. It's not someone losing their temper once off, flying off the handle. It's not an argument, a once-off argument. It's actually a series of behaviour over time. It's coercion. And I think that nobody really wants to, it's hard for people to air that dirty laundry in their own families. And often that it's multi-generational. So people who are using violence might have had violence used against them, quite likely. So I think there's some of the reasons that we like to sort of talk about violence happening, I guess, in the street, which certainly, it does. And I think in our community, there's types of violence. There's single session, there is still sexual assault, and there's people who have sexual violence through apps and through sex on premises. And I think there is different things in our community that are different ways of family violence. But I don't know, what do you, look, I started with talking about capitalism. I feel like that's a great place to start a panel, and we can work it back from there.
Before we extend it out, I didn't
plan to say that, can I just say?
But I'm going to do a follow-up on capitalism.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, just thinking about the structures and systems that uphold capitalism.
This is a different type of panel.
When you mentioned that, it made me think of certain legislative policies, some that still exist and some that have since been repealed. And I wondered if you thought perhaps this idea of privacy, what happens in a home, shouldn't be talked about.
Yeah, I think most people are aware of Mark Latham's bill that's before, the New South Wales Parliament. And I think that's all about premised on the idea of the rights of parents and their rights of privacy and the rights of what happens behind closed doors. And I think a lot of the time, we talk about family violence in euphemisms, particularly in our community, where we say things like, oh, blah, blah's family, oh, my family, they're just not that supportive, or their family is not that supportive. But often they're actually just masks for emotional, physical violence, family violence. And I think that, we have to look at those masks and we have to shine a light it's difficult for our community because we are worried about having our rights taken away from us if we're seen as having just as many problems as cisgendered heterosexual people. We're really worried that, we were really worried in the marriage debate if we showed that we just had just as many problems as straight and cisgendered people had, that maybe we wouldn't have our rights. And we're worried about losing our rights. So I think there's privacy of society, and there's privacy of what it means to be a queer person, to lose that privacy, and it's not simple.
Yeah, thanks, Jo. Sage, why do you think it's so difficult for so many people to reconcile the spectre of violence with the concept of a family?
I think it extends on what you were saying about what happens behind closed doors is the family's business, and I think to extend on that as well about, I guess, not having the right tools and language to be able to identify that is what is actually going on. For me, I look back in my experience that I spoke to Respect Victoria about through this campaign, and, when I was younger, I didn't have the language or the knowledge to be able to identify what was going on and to place that as family violence. And when we're talking about, putting an intersectional lens on it, when we're talking about people, with diverse cultural backgrounds, that's another added barrier of how do you figure out that that's what that is, and there are actually support services to help you because, nobody's talking about it or nobody's framing it in your, to fit your sort of situation and your experience, and you're not seeing that represented, within the media or within service providers and things like that. So how are you supposed to know what that looks like to be able to speak about it? And I think there's also another level of, stigma and shame around that. I don't want to be the one to speak out because I might be the only one going through this and I'll, get judgment or, all sorts of things. And that's just a shame cycle that just keeps on perpetuating on itself. And, we all just kind of want to fit in and appear normal as possible. There's another added layer when we're talking about queerness and transness and, LGBTIQA plus people. We already are very different to society. We are already othered. And to add another layer of talking about family violence and, the impacts that has on us puts another, I guess, barrier and a reason to, isolate as well.
And I think that's just another reason, Sage, that you should be commended for your courage for speaking out on this issue. So thank you again. What was it that compelled you to join this campaign and share your personal story?
Yeah, thank you. Look, it does take a lot of courage, but I think the decision was made fairly easy for me only because I look back and I think if I had somebody that said those things to me when I was that age, if I had somewhere to be able to read that story, to show me hope, to show me that it was going to be okay, to show me that there was some sort of way out, to even just see myself represented in a positive light within media and within, my community and things, that would have just been absolutely life-saving, and it would have, helped me so much and avoid, all this unnecessary trauma and such, and I would have had this idea of hope to achieve, in future. So I think to make that decision to be a part of a campaign like this and be able to go publicly with my story, it's definitely driven with what I can contribute to other people and young people as well as, all ages. And I think I do also want to recognise that there is a privilege in being able to speak out and be so public about your story and what you've experienced. And there are obviously some downfalls, but I think, the positive outweighs the negative in this situation.
Yeah, well, thank you again. I think we're all really grateful. Karen, when we look at the stats, that's short for statistics. When we look at the stats on, Tracey mentioned in the introduction that like as many as 60% of LGBTIQ plus people have experienced family violence. And when I did a bit of reading before this event, I mean, you'd hope so, but and the research shows that the majority of that that violence is perpetrated from parents towards their children. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on, like, what is it about a relationship between a parent and a child that's so different to, to other relationships? And thinking about diverse sexuality and gender, how does that impact on a way a parent might see their child?
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty complex kind of area. I grew up in family violence, and what is interesting that when we talk about family violence from parent to child, we assume that both parents. And so often what happens, and I think Sage and I spoke briefly about this, is that we often use Western world concepts of what a family is, mum, dad, a number of kids, etc. And often it's not as clear-cut as that. Often you will find in our work, we often find one parent that could well be, impacting in terms of the whole family or impacting on that child or young person who is queer. But often we can find beyond just that parent, a parent that needs help and support to provide support to that child or young person. We often see stories of incredible resilience, like Sage, like my own, where one parent, through help and support, can wrap around a child or young person. And if you think about queer young people, often what happens is that we are in a whole range of spheres that can be, we're not just experiencing potentially abuse or violence or discrimination within the family, but in other spheres of our life. And what I'd love to see, and what this campaign for me is about, is to reaching out to families, a much broader concept, beyond, just parents. But I grew up in New Zealand, whānau, extended family, aunties, uncles, grandparents, etc. That can become an arena of comfort, to not ignore those things, but to step in and step up. And that is hugely protective of young queer people like myself, because particularly in the face of other forms of discrimination as well. So I also think it has a huge impact on our ability to separate violence or abuse that we experience in our own families to violence and abuse that we experience in other spheres of our life. Mm-hmm. And so, often there's this idea that it's hard to see it because it's just them being angry or unwell or a whole range of other things. And that's the really sad part.
Mm. I like the way you framed all of that, but in particular about a parent who needs help and needs support, because we've got some different ages represented on the panel and in the audience, I assume, but for a lot of parents, the first gender-diverse person they've ever met could be their child. Yep. Or when their child tells them that they're gay, for instance, that parent might have grown up, might have been, grown up through the 70s and 80s and only have, because attitudes are quite different with generations gone by, right? So obviously this is another reason why this campaign is so important.
I wonder if, can I interject?
Please.
I just, when you say that, I think about this time that I went to this school when I hadn't been working at Switchboard for that long, and I got asked to come out for an Ida Hobbit event. And I remember that I got up in front of the school and I spoke about what it was like to be queer in Queensland not long after decriminalisation and to feel just very alone. There'd just been Joh Bjelke-Petersen, it had been a pretty terrible time, and it was school in the 90s, and decrim in Queensland was 1992. And anyway, I was talking in front of the school about what it was like, that sort of period of feeling like you were barely legal and that you didn't talk to your parents, and my parents were unsupportive, and all sorts of things. And I gave it, I don't often give personal stories, and I did at this school because I wanted to relate to these young people. And afterwards, there was a standout group that I went to, which is like, I think most of you know, like Standout is like a school pride network. And I sort of felt like my story was like, look how bad things were. Like, that's what I thought my story was saying. Like, as in, like, look how bad things were in the 90s in Queensland. Look how great it is that you have a speaker at your assembly speaking. And I remember this person came in and they were crying. They came crying into the Standout group and they said, your story is my story. That was the first words they managed to get out of their voice, from crying. And I guess that's what I would say to that, kind of like things are changing generationally. Like, yes, they are. But for some individuals, it just, the home life, like, because her story was, my parents don't accept me, and she was just really over-related to my story, and it didn't matter how much marriage equality had happened, it didn't matter this or that had happened. Her circumstance and her family she saw was exactly the same as mine was in the 90s. And that's what I think how important families are, really, is that the legislation can change, all sorts of things can change, but if the climate in the home in those very early years and the power your parents have over you is repressive and unaffirming, it can feel like Queensland in the 90s. Yeah.
And Sage, obviously families from like culturally diverse, I hate that phrase, but sort of like culturally diverse backgrounds or like quite conservative religious backgrounds, they're not necessarily going to be in step with what I've just described, right? This sort of like, oh, well, it's 2021 now, so everybody voted yes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just want to touch on both points, what you said about the parent-child relationship and that point as well. I think we all look to our families, you know, whether it be our parents or our caregivers or guardians, whoever is looking after us. We all look to them for guidance. We all look to them for acceptance and validation. You know, and when your family, the people that you're living with every day, don't recognise your identity, don't respect it, don't validate it, don't nurture it, and allow you the space to, you know, grow into, you know, whatever your identity is, sexuality, gender, whatever it is. You know, that's when it becomes obviously problematic. And I think the relationship there is, you know, we're all kind of one adult away, you know, one supportive adult away from having a good future and a positive life. And I think for me, you know, my mum did in the end come around, and it took many, many years. And I think, you know, I look back and I often think, if that didn't happen, where would my life be? What would I have been like, you know? But it just takes one adult, whether it's a parent, whether it's an auntie, or, you know, somebody somewhere in the family, whether it's you know, a teacher, for example, you know, whether it's you know, some sort of mentor, some sort of adult that's supportive. I think that makes the world of a difference to young people growing up in a home that is repressive and oppressive to their gender identity. And I think when we're talking about cultural households or ethnic households and religious aspects as well, you know, my family came from a, you know, very strict Lebanese background, you know, Middle Eastern countries where you know, they didn't see that as a thing. They saw it as something sinful. They saw that as something that brought shame to the family, brought dishonor to the family, you know, all sorts of things. So there's a multi-level faceted sort of approach there, I guess, that is needed to understand that it's not just about, yes, it's 2021, come on, get with the program kind of thing. There is language and we're all evolving and knowledge out there now and resources available. But I think back and I think my mum wouldn't have accessed those resources because she would have just been so certain in her mind that this is not something that is right or okay. So then it's like, how do we take that approach of understanding, okay, this is, you know, this is who we're working with. How can we make sure that, you know, all people get access to those services in the right and appropriate way that suits their culture and is acknowledgement of their culture and religious backgrounds.
Did you want to chime in, Karen?
I mean,
I can see you nodding. Really
it absolutely resonated because I grew up in two, you know, like both on my father's side and on my mother's side, who had their heritage on one side, had their Italian heritage on the other side. On my mum's side, had their Samoan heritage in order to fit in, to be white passing, etc. And then, you know, to finally escape violence, like we all managed to escape the violence thanks to a few very fierce trans whawhawhine women. But what I found was amazing was that because of that experience, in a way, both my mother and my grandmother were able to see, because of their hiding themselves and their identity, to be able to talk about what that's actually like as a queer person as well. And I do recall my grandmother not long before she dying saying to me, yeah, I've thought about it and I'd quite like a wife. I could see that would be useful.
How wonderful. Sort of, I assume she's reached an old age and she's sort of taking stock and is like, actually, on balance.
On balance.
If I had my time
this is looking
again,
all right.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Sage, I really loved the way, when you said, you know, a young person is just one supportive adult away from their life being completely different. You said it better, I've mangled it there. But that's just so true, and that's actually reflected in the data. It's a couple of years old now, but the Telethon Trans Pathways piece of research, which came out in 2017, I believe, found that, for for young trans people who don't have a supportive family member in their life, like, doesn't feel safe at home, the statistics are like, they're shocking, and you don't need me to repeat those statistics. They're really bad. But if a young trans or gender diverse person has the support of their family or a parent, then their outcomes for self-harm, mental illness, suicide attempts are exactly the same as any other child, any of their peers. Like, it's just extraordinary what a bit of support can do. What role does the media play in all of this? Like, what role does the media play in terms of attitudes towards LGBTIQ plus people?
I'll jump in. I'll tackle that first. And then, look, I think it plays a massive role. The media is so mainstream, like whatever kind of media outlet or channel that we're tuning into, it's a very widely used source of information, I guess. And whether we're talking about, television, movies, things like that, or whether we're talking about, copy or, newspapers and things like that, where it's the narrative that they, the narrative that they use to talk about the community is so important. And we definitely get a lot of negative narratives, get told all the doom and gloom and how hard and difficult our lives are. And while that might be very much true, I think there's a lot to also celebrate, within our lives and within our own identities. And I think the reason that they are hard is because of the broader society and how hard it is for us to, kind of live within that world that doesn't always make room for us. And I guess when we're talking about going back to like supporting adults and things like that, adults are reading newspapers and watching TV and watching movies and things like that, where trans people and queer people are all seen as almost like a gay best friend who's like always making the jokes, who's never like a serious character, or when they are, it's like so serious that like there's like self-harm and there's suicidality and like there's such heavy things, and a lot of trans and diverse representation isn't actually true and authentic representation. Often it's actually at the cost of them, that we're making jokes or laughing. So we're being taught through the media to respond in inappropriate ways to trans and queer people. So it plays a massive part in making sure that they actually represent us authentically and they represent our narratives in the right way.
Karen, what do you think the media can do better, so representing our narratives in the right way? Like, what are some things that the media, I'm thinking like news and current affairs, but also kind of like pop culture media as well. What can they do better?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is everything from, realistic and positive representations of our relationships, of who we are, of our families, etc. That there is the kind of the balance of those things. And we've seen it turn pretty ugly over the last, 6-7 years with safer schools, etc. And that has been really harmful to the way in which parents or even families are learning about things like, gender diversity or whatever else. And so that has been, I think, incredibly harmful in a whole lot of ways. And so, our ability to have campaigns like this that does, show the beauty of our relationships, of how important those supportive relationships are to, not just around in terms of the absence of violence, but to our well-being, as you said. We are all part of a human condition that needs these, nurturing, safe, respectful, interactions, and we do much better in terms of our mental health and when those things are. So being able to see, really the balance of those things is really important.
Joe?
Yeah, I think it's worth saying, for those who don't know, Switchboard Victoria runs 2 helplines, the Victorian Q Life. We're the Victorian partner in Q Life, and we run Rainbow Door, 2 7-day-a-week helplines. And why I bring that up right now is that every time there is hate in the media, and I deliberately call it hate, whether it's Israel Folau, Mark Latham, people, some so-called medical professional against trans youth, whenever that happens, whenever people call our services in deep distress, it affects their lives, it escalates the conversations around their people's individual legitimacy, their sense of self, and it escalates the violence in families of what parents say to children. And I think that, that's just a fact. It really matters what happens in the media. And then that's the news media, but then of course you've got, the first trans film I ever saw where I felt like I saw myself reflected was Boys Don't Cry. And that is a story of family violence. Yeah. And that was the first time I went, that person's like me. And if you know that story, you know what happens in that story, and the person ends up dead. But it's step family violence that actually happens in Boys Don't Cry. And so we need positive representations in the media. I've outlined the consequences, but we need positive representations like the Respect Victoria campaign in that format, but we also need it in films. And, that's why things like the Melbourne Queer Film Festival are just so important. And your local film festival, if it's, there's different ones in different states. But I think that we need to see positive representations of yourself. It was not great, I guess, for that to be the I'm not alone that's the first time I saw a trans masculine represented in media. I'm sure other people, that was the first time they saw it was Boys Don't Cry, and I'm not alone in that. And the messages that sends to you about the world you're going to grow into and how scary the world is. So, and it's a true story, right? That's the other part of Boys Don't Cry. So I think that media really matters, and I feel really passionate about the Respect Victoria campaign. I certainly, because it's about media, and I when I watch the videos, Sally Conning's story, as someone I personally know, and Sage, and the stories just are so powerful, And if you haven't watched them, I really recommend to watch them with a packet of tissues. But yeah.
Sorry, Sally, do you mind if I
please.
just add, while we're talking about the media, I think recently, and we saw it in 2017 as well, the media opened up an invitation for the public to speak about LGBTIQA plus lives and identities, and suddenly everybody felt like they were entitled to an opinion about our lives, from the plebiscite and the way the media sort of framed that. And I still see that now happening a lot with, trans and gender diverse topics, inclusive bathrooms in schools and in workplaces, and not using the terms mum and dad, and, clickbait sort of articles that are offering people a platform to have an opinion on our lives, and a negative opinion too. And it starts these online wars between, our community and other communities that don't fit within that. So I think the media should probably think about, well, what are the intentions behind these news stories or these articles that we are sending out? Are we doing it to actually represent the LGBTIQA plus community and, highlight their experiences for the right reasons? Or are we doing it to open up and make them targets and trapping them, to be targets to the wider society?
And the reality is as well, because of that vicious media and how they have learnt what gets clicks. Even Q&A last year had a 2012-esque question about whether it was okay to be gay. Because their ratings are down. Well, I assume that was why they put that question in. But, the media have learnt that if they put this sort of, as you call it, clickbait stuff, it drives clicks.
And I think the thing is that it's not that you just read the article. The ideas sit with you. I wonder how many of you remember when John Howard said on Q&A, when he said, it wasn't Q&A, whatever it was when John Howard was around, and he said, he was asked, how would you feel? This is the Prime Minister of Australia. How would you feel if your child came out to you as gay? How many people remember that? Does anyone remember that? And you know what his answer was? I, like any other parent, would be extremely disappointed. I don't know, but that has stayed with me, as a person, as a young person hearing that. And I think that is media,
Was that the episode when someone threw a shoe at him? Because like it better have been.
It was a young person asking him as well, and that was considered, you know, a legitimate way to answer the question, and maybe a way that it would be answered today, maybe. But I think that, yeah, look, I just, you know, I think that we do need to address the media very seriously. That's what I see on the work that we do at Switchboard every day, is the consequences of these negative messages. They are not just debate. They are not just everybody needs a say. It's an equal playing field. There's freedom of speech because, in fact, in order for us to combat these negative messages, we'd have to be saying them so much more. There's so much platform for the anti-trans argument right now. Look, I mean, the Australian, in the lead up to the birth certificate reform, you know, published some 30 articles in 2 months in the lead up to the Victorian birth certificate debate. So you can't say that there's a lack of platforming of that that negative opinion.
Fortunately, not many people read The Australian, but it doesn't...
The paywall has been amazing.
Yeah.
You know?
The circulation, I'm like embarrassed for them in a whole different, you know, many different ways.
Can I just say something to
please,
that? But I think what you're also pointing to is the lack of leadership that at times we've seen, well, and we continue to see within our political circles around these issues. And, you know, the fact that you know, okay, we live in a state that says it's okay for, not only is it okay for us to exist, but our rights are being enshrined, those debates are being had. And it's fundamental, it is fundamental to our mental health to all enjoy, you know, equal human rights. And often that debate goes out, it becomes about ideology or a whole range of other things. That we have a whole body of science that says that where parents and families are supportive of kids, no matter what, they do better. So, you know, there's some fundamentals that we know about well-being that are being pushed into all sorts of things. And that's why saying, step up. You know, your support of your kid, of your sibling, of your grandchildren is one of the most fundamental protective things that you can do for any kid. The old village. Well, guess what? This is the village.
I think it's also worth pointing out, you know, as we talk about the horrible clickbaity media, that, you know, this campaign and this discussion right here exists within that context, right? And I think that's probably why historically LGBTIQ plus people haven't really talked a lot in public around family violence, because our families and our identities have been so scrutinised and so targeted for so long. So it's, another reason why I think the stories that have been shared are so courageous, and the campaign itself is so courageous. And my hope is that all of us here and all of us watching can kind of link arms around this campaign and this idea, and kind of do as much as we can to stop it from being, you know, being pulled into the culture wars, because this isn't about culture wars, this is about keeping people safe. So, Karen, you've got a lot of experience in, I mean, a whole lot of things. Your bio is
but
just
that's enough for the 30 years.
Yeah, I'm not going to read it again, but thinking about sort of like service delivery and public health, obviously your experience and the experience of the panel is centred around LGBTIQ plus communities, but in terms of the sort of mainstream or the normie sectors, what would you like them to know? You know, if it's sort of like a service provider who might not necessarily know much about queer issues, or a what would you hope that services supporting people who've experienced violence would know?
The way, I think this is, we are all in this business, and we take an approach to helping people who are impacted by violence. And it's like any other thing, we need mainstream to educate itself. And we're seeing a lot more movement towards educating itself around understanding LGBTIQ plus people's experience of family violence, or how to support families, and to ensure that they're supporting their children and young people who are coming out. So it's like any other, like I've been in service provision for 30-something, whatever years. If you don't know, you educate yourself. If you don't have that education's not available, because we're learning all the time. I mean, we're incredibly grateful to the 40 years of feminist, family violence evidence that has helped us to understand and define what violence looks like. And then we've been able to take that and think about what that looks like for queer young people, for in intimate partner violence, all those things. They're all tough conversations for us to even have as a community, and very, different communities within queer. But we need to be able to have great allies in mainstream that help us to unpack and learn about those things. And we need those systems to be the alternate care systems when we're unsafe. Mm-hmm. So, and that's the thing that we often forget, that for me, for Sage, I'm sure for lots of queer people, that those systems needed to step up and step in and help us to get through, in order to kind of, develop our own families of origins or families of choice, or help our families heal, or help us to understand culture and all those sorts of things. That's what we need mainstream to do.
Yeah. Sage, can you share what you think a family member or a carer can do if, like, to support their family members or young people in their life who are LGBTIQ plus?
Yeah, I think the important thing to acknowledge here is that we don't have to be reactive to our young people coming out, and then we have to go and scramble and try and find the support services and the resources and the information. I think it's important to be proactive about this, because it will be useful for you to know whether it's for your own personal family, or whether it's for your colleagues or friends, or some sort of circle where you might come across somebody who is LGBTIQA+. So it's important to be proactive and find that information before you have to find that information, if that makes sense. And look, I think it's all about creating that safe space. It's all about creating a space that you don't have to show that you understand sort of everything. Like when I spoke to my mum about it, I didn't intend, my coming out was a bit unique, I guess. It wasn't a choice in coming out. I was forced into it, I guess, at the time when I was about 14, 15. But when we did speak about it, I didn't expect her to know everything, because I didn't even have the answers myself. I had lots of questions, and I assumed that she would as well. She still does, many, many years down the track too. But it's about just creating that space where they, your kids or your young people can come and speak to you. They know that you're a safe person to speak about absolutely anything. You might not know exactly how to respond, but as long as you provide that environment where they can come to you, speak to you, and then figure out the solution together, figure out how to find the answer together, maybe jump online, find some resources together, that sort of thing. So you don't have to know it all, but you have to be open and receptive to listen, create this safe environment, and then to find and seek that information.
Yeah, wonderful. And Jo, we've talked a lot tonight about young people, because I think when we think about family, because of capitalism, we will often think of sort of like 2 parents, 2.5 kids, and 2.5 dogs.
I was thinking about the nuclear family.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes.
So, but, you know, when we talk about family, we often think about the nuclear family, but, you know, families grow up, right? Like people get older, such is the march of time. And so when we talk about children, it's not just people under 18, right? Like we're all children. And how do you see violence and abuse within families, like through your work? How do you see that manifesting as time goes on? And perhaps how do you see families tackle that in a positive way?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I'm so proud at Switchboard that we run an older people's visiting program. It constantly gives me joy, and we had a great show on the ABC about it if you ever want to watch it. But, you know, and it's matching younger, well, it's really not that younger. Sometimes the visitors are older than the person they visit, but it's intergenerational relationships of visiting people LGBTI people who are older in their home or in an aged care facility. And, you know, it's about, I guess, organising chosen family for people who are isolated at that time of their life. Some people who are like older gay men who lost their chosen family in AIDS, or a trans person who came out later in their life who lost their family through that family violence. So it's that organising the chosen family. But what we see in our program, the other side of the beautifulness of the matching and the visiting, is that we also see elder abuse. We see the people who are in aged care where their children, you know, are enacting elder abuse, they're enacting family violence against them. And I think we forget about that. We think that maybe after 30 that we stop thinking about children in the family violence context, or they think that your parents will get over it. Like, you know, it's sort of an assumption, but I know many of you who are listening today, you know that parents don't always get the information and change their mind. They may hold those ideas for the rest of their life, and children may hold those ideas as well. And that's what we see, is sometimes adult children holding terrible ideas against their parents and being violent, being emotionally, financially, and we can't forget that other end of family violence. And so it's very, very important to talk about elder abuse in our communities, and to shine a light on it. And I think for me, the part of your question, what's a positive story? I love Sally Conning's story in the Respect Victoria campaign. I know Sally, and I mean, I was really lucky to meet her for the first time on the LGBTI roadshow with the Commissioner. And I got to see, I guess, her coming out to her whole town, and it was amazing. She is an amazing person. And the story in there of her sister, how her sister supports her, and that's the other part, you're talking about like one parent, one adult. But as we get older, it might be one sibling, one visitor in the out and about. Somebody in your life who affirms you is so important. And that's my positive story to end on tonight, is the story of Sally. And I'm really proud to say she's a Switchboard ambassador and drives more than anyone I know around the state, telling them about our service, which is incredible. And she's an ambassador for many different things, including the Respect Victoria campaign. And I think they were lucky to nab her to be a front person for it.
Thanks for sharing that. What was the program that you mentioned where you match people? I'm sure there's people who want to know what that's called.
Yeah, it's called Out and About.
Out and About.
Which, you know, how good, yeah, that's...
That's good. And why is it called Out and About?
Yeah. And look, yeah, exactly. But I think that it's really, you know, and one thing I was telling Sally backstage is thing we don't realise is about the coming out, and that, you know, coming out can be a side of violence at any stage of your life. And, you know, we have people in the Out and About program who are older trans women coming out in their aged care facilities, getting on hormones for the first time in their life, telling their children, you know, in aged care facilities that they're a trans woman. And I think, wow, you know, that's what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about people who, learning the wisdom of older people in our community and being inspired by them and being inspired by their courage. And any work we can do to remember that side of family violence and to support those people is something well worth investing our time in.
Thanks, Drew. Karen, was there a time in your life, either personally or as something you've witnessed, that struck you as just sort of like emblematic of what positive support can look like from a family member?
Absolutely. Like, I'm now a grandparent of 4 littlies, from 8 down to the younger 2 are 5. And I look at the way my family, including we've had quite a few foster kids, etc., engage with my family of origin, and the pressure on us, and from the grandchildren all the way across, as soon as marriage equality came in, that it was going to happen finally.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. You and Ellie Hogg, who I think is down there. But, I've seen, and the sorts of examples that Joe gives too, like we the degree, we are one of the most incredible resilient communities. The degree to which this community volunteers, mentors, joins onto peer support organisations, you name it, to reach out, to create community, to create families of choice and wrap around. We don't always get it right, and we're learning lots all the time. I think we're learning lots about, say, QTPOC, people in our community that not always, and that's queer, trans, intersex, people of colour, that not always is it safe for them to come out. So we're having to try and find spaces around, incredibly supportive programs for them where they can be themselves and live across different worlds, because they don't want to lose faith, or they don't want to lose, culture and things like that. So they're the things that I think just make an enormous difference. But also, I have been incredibly heartened over the last 15 years of working with families, of turning families around, of turning siblings around, finding that supportive grandparent when a kid's in child protection now that doesn't think this is good enough and is learning all sorts about, gender identity, and they're incredible stories, and they keep you going.
We're just about out of time, but Sage, I just wanted to finish with you. You've told us about your mother, so I'm not going to ask the same question I've just thrown to Karen, but I wondered, what does family mean to you? What is family?
That's a question to end on. Yeah, look, I think for me as a queer and trans non-binary person, family has had to evolve. That word has had to, take on many different meanings. And I think, I did have my, little circle of family. Growing up, I actually moved from Lebanon over to Australia. And so I lost, probably like 80% of my family during that move. And a lot of them are, still over there. So for that reason as well, I've had to sort of get a chosen family because of that as well, I guess. But I think it means, people who are going to be there for you, in your corner, backing you, supporting you, providing you with, a space to be yourself, be able to bring your whole true self to those experiences, to those environments together. And I think when I kind of grew up and sort of spread my wings, I guess, as I got to 18, 19 and things, I started going out and experiencing my community, the LGBTIQA plus community, and that to me was family, whether those people are still in my lives or not. And I guess it's also about when we're talking about advocacy and activism and things like that, like, there's my family there as well, of a family of activists who, do the really hard work, and, when one of us takes a break, the other one steps up, and, that kind of family dynamic as well. So, yeah, it's quite a broad answer, I guess, to what family is. It means many, many different things to me, but yeah, support and having each other's backs at the end of the day.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree, and I'm certain there's many people in the room who do. And that's why I feel particularly hopeful about this campaign, because, as queer people, we step up and we step in for each other time and time again. So thank you all for being here tonight, for stepping in for this event. And thank you so much for continuing to share the campaign once you get home, or like scrolling your phone on the way home. Thank you again to all of our panellists. Please put your hands together for Jo, Sage and Karen, and our interpreters Amber and Linda. As you make your way out, there's a table towards the back that has a series of pamphlets on it, which includes some numbers to Rainbow Door and Switchboard and Drummond Street, and any service that tickles your fancy. I'm sure it's on the back table. Thanks again so much for coming. My name's Sally, and we'll see you all again soon, hopefully.
Thank you.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and around the world.